Voiceover: what if the economic system we live in was not a natural law, but a carefully constructed ideology? What if the rules of our global economy were designed not for human prosperity, but for the concentration of wealth and power? This is not just an economic discussion, this is a human story, a story of how abstract systems reshape lives, erase cultures, and determine the fate of millions. Welcome to TopThangs, dear viewer. If you like this type of videos, hit that like and follow. And don't forget to share in the comments what other interesting topics you want to see next. The year is 1973. Chile is on fire. A democratically elected socialist government is overthrown in a brutal coup, orchestrated by General Augusto Pinochet and backed by the United States. This marked a turning point. It wasn't just a political coup, it was an economic one. A new order was being written, one where the market reigned supreme. Out of the ashes of Chile, a radical economic experiment emerged. Milton Friedman's disciples, the Chicago Boys, were unleashed. They implemented shock therapy, privatization, deregulation, austerity. This became a global model. Neoliberalism was decades in the making, fueled by think tanks and powerful interests. The Mont Pelerin Society, with intellectuals like Friedrich Hayek, provided the ammunition. They argued for unfettered markets, minimal government, and individual choice. The 1980s saw neoliberalism's global ascendance. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher championed free trade, privatization, and deregulation. The Berlin Wall fell, and with it, the perceived threat of communism. Capitalism, in its neoliberal form, had triumphed. This was the era of the Washington Consensus, a set of neoliberal prescriptions imposed on developing countries by the IMF and World Bank. Structural adjustment programs became the order of the day. Open your markets, cut social spending, privatize your industries, or face the consequences. At the heart of neoliberalism lies an unwavering faith in the market as the ultimate arbiter of human affairs. It's a belief system built on four key pillars: market fundamentalism, privatization, minimal state intervention, and global capital mobility. Market fundamentalism posits that the invisible hand of the market is always right. Leave everything to supply and demand, the theory goes, and prosperity will trickle down to all. Privatization takes this a step further, advocating for the transfer of public goods and services from healthcare and education to water and electricity into private hands. Minimal state intervention is the mantra. Governments, according to neoliberalism, are inherently inefficient and corrupt. Their role should be limited to protecting private property rights and enforcing contracts. Global capital mobility completes the picture, allowing money to flow freely across borders, unhindered by regulations or capital controls. These principles, enshrined in trade agreements and enforced by international financial institutions, have reshaped the global economy in profound ways. But at what cost? The International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank and the World Trade Organization, WTO, these institutions, often called the Bretton Woods institutions, are central to the neoliberal project. Created after World War II, their initial goal was to rebuild economies and promote cooperation. Over time, their mission changed. They now enforce neoliberal policies, often with harsh consequences. The IMF's structural adjustment programs are particularly notorious. These programs bind economies to neoliberal policies, privatize, cut social spending, devalue currency. These are the IMF's prescriptions. The World Bank also plays a key role, often saddling countries with debt. The WTO champions trade liberalization, often harming local industries. Together, these institutions favor the wealthy and powerful. They have facilitated a global race to the bottom. Debt. It's the lifeblood of the neoliberal system, a powerful tool used to extract wealth from the global south and transfer it to the coffers of multinational corporations and financial institutions. It's a vicious cycle, one that begins with loans, often offered with predatory terms, and ends with countries forced to sacrifice their sovereignty on the altar of debt repayment. Structural adjustment programs imposed by the IMF as a condition for receiving loans often exacerbate the problem. Austerity measures, such as cuts to social spending and public sector layoffs, depress economic activity, making it even harder for countries to service their debts. This creates a perverse incentive structure. Countries, desperate to attract foreign investment and avoid default, find themselves competing with each other to offer the most favorable terms. Lower taxes, weaker environmental regulations, and suppressed wages. It's a race to the bottom, a race that leaves workers and the environment bearing the brunt of the costs. This is not just about economics, it's about power. The debt trap is a tool of neo-colonialism, a way for wealthy nations and corporations to maintain their grip on the levers of global power. It's a system designed to keep the global south in a perpetual state of dependence. Section 5. Latin America, a continent under adjustment. Latin America, once a beacon of hope for socialist and progressive movements, became a testing ground for neoliberal shock therapy. From the coup in Chile to the debt crisis of the 1980s, the continent was subjected to a brutal experiment in free market fundamentalism. Privatization swept across the region like a hurricane. State-owned enterprises, from airlines and telecommunications companies to water and electricity utilities, were sold off to private investors, often at bargain basement prices. The results were predictable soaring prices, declining service quality, and job losses. Austerity measures imposed by the IMF further exacerbated the pain. Social spending was slashed, public sector workers were laid off, and wages were suppressed. The social safety net, already threadbare, was shredded. Poverty and inequality skyrocketed. The human cost of these policies was immeasurable. From the streets of Buenos Aires to the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, people rose up in protest. The pink tide of left-leaning governments that swept across the region in the early 2000s was a direct response to the failures of neoliberalism. Africa, a continent rich in natural resources but plagued by poverty and instability, has become a prime target for neoliberal plunder. The new Scramble for Africa, driven by global demand for oil, minerals and land, is underway. Multinational corporations, often with the backing of their home governments, are securing access to Africa's vast reserves of natural wealth. Land grabs, often involving the displacement of small farmers, are on the rise. Mining operations, often with little regard for environmental or social consequences, are proliferating. Trade liberalization, championed by the World Trade Organization, has further undermined African economies. Cheap imports, often subsidized by wealthy nations, have flooded local markets, driving domestic producers out of business. The result is a familiar story: economic dependence, environmental degradation, and social unrest. The benefits of Africa's vast natural wealth are being siphoned off by foreign corporations and a small elite, while the majority of the population continues to languish in poverty. Southeast Asia, with its low wages and lax labor laws, has become the world's factory floor. From garments and electronics to toys and footwear, the region produces a vast array of consumer goods for the global market. Multinational corporations seeking to maximize profits have flocked to Southeast Asia, drawn by its vast pool of cheap labor. Sweatshops, where workers toil long hours for poverty wages in unsafe and unhealthy conditions, are ubiquitous. Labor unions are weak or non-existent, and workers have few legal protections. Those who dare to speak out or organize are often met with intimidation, violence, or dismissal. The global supply chains that connect consumers in the global north to workers in the global south are often characterized by exploitation and abuse. The clothes we wear, the gadgets we use, the toys our children play with, they are often produced at a human cost. But resistance is brewing. From the streets of Seattle to the Zapatista uprising in Chiapas, people are rising up to challenge the neoliberal order. Social movements led by indigenous communities, labor unions, environmental activists, and ordinary citizens are demanding a more just and sustainable world. In Latin America, movements like the landless workers movement in Brazil and the Zapatistas in Mexico are reclaiming land, building alternative economies, and challenging corporate power. In Africa, communities are resisting land grabs, fighting for fair trade policies, and demanding accountability from multinational corporations. In Southeast Asia, labor activists are organizing workers, demanding better wages and working conditions, and fighting for their right to form unions. These movements are not just resisting, they are building. They are creating alternative economic models based on cooperation, solidarity, and sustainability. They are reclaiming the commons, promoting local food systems, and building worker-owned cooperatives. The time for a fundamental shift is long overdue. We need to move beyond the narrow confines of neoliberal capitalism and embrace a new economic paradigm, one that prioritizes people and the planet over profit. This means challenging the power of multinational corporations and financial institutions. It means demanding an end to austerity measures and structural adjustment programs. It means building a global economy based on fair trade, not free trade. It means investing in public goods and services, from healthcare and education to renewable energy and sustainable agriculture. It means creating decent jobs with living wages and strong labor protections. It means ensuring that everyone has access to the basic necessities of life. The future is not predetermined. Another world is possible. But it will require a fundamental shift in our values, our priorities, and our systems. It will require us to come together across borders and across movements to build a more just, equitable, and sustainable world for all. The system is not immutable. It is not a force of nature, but a human creation. And what humans have created, humans can also transform. Every economic choice is a moral choice. Every purchase is a vote. Every collaboration is a potential revolution. The future is not written. It is negotiated day by day, choice by people who dare to imagine something different. Thank you for watching TopThangs. Let us know what other topics we should cover. See you in the next one, dear viewer.